We have with us Catherine Bracy and Becca from the TechEquity Collaborative. I think the mission statement says something like, how the technology industry can play a role in reducing inequality, in the Bay Area and beyond, instead of increasing inequality. Her own background, I met Bracy, I think right when we both kind of first moved out here. She was helping the Tech for Obama community coming together during the 2012 election. And then after that, she was one of the leaders of Code for America, which I'm sure some of you know. And she was instrumental in building the, kind of the communities that came up globally, or called the Brigade. So it's sort of like the informal communities that wanted to help support the issues of Code for America. And then after leaving that, had founded TechEquity Collaborative. So super happy to have you here, Catherine. Thanks for taking the time, and take it from here.
Thanks. I'm really happy to be here. I've been following Change's work since the very beginning, and it's just really exciting to see how much you guys have grown over the years. How many of you guys in the room live in San Francisco? How many in the East Bay? Anyone anywhere else? Peninsula, Marin? Okay. Who's been here more than 10 years?
Change or
in the Bay Area. Any Bay Area natives? Yeah, that's more than we usually see. Anyone here less than 5 years? Okay. How many of you have experienced this sentiment since you've been here? Yeah. I feel like we see a lot of this on the streets of the Bay Area these days. This came literally home to my doorstep a few years ago when Uber announced that they were buying the old Sears department store in downtown Oakland, which happens to be right across the street from my apartment. And we're going to move about 2,500 jobs there. And the community reacted very negatively and started organizing against Uber's move. Do folks remember when this happened? Yeah. So, the epilogue to that story is that Uber has since sold the building, and it's not clear whether they're moving anybody there. But at the time, a lot of people were very concerned about what this meant for the neighborhood. And as someone, as Colin explained, I've been working at the intersection of technology and civics for a long time. I was very interested to see, this interaction between a large tech company. At the time, Uber did not have quite the reputation it has now. And the community. And it got me reflecting on what it meant for the future sustainability of our economy, that the most valuable privately held company in the world could announce that they're moving thousands of good jobs to a place where the median income is about $25,000 a year, and the community would not see value in that. So, what does that mean for our economy, and how did we get here? But also, how do we get out? What would it take to create? What conditions would need to be in place for a company, maybe not Uber at this point, but insert large tech company name here, to make a similar announcement for the community to really celebrate that? So as I started kind of reflecting and researching about how we've gotten to this place in our economy. As someone, I grew up outside of Detroit in the 80s, and a company making an announcement like that would have been celebrated, and it got, I was trying to figure out where we had diverged. So I came up with 3-ish answers. The first one, has anyone heard of Richard Florida, or the term the creative class? Okay, so we are all part of the creative class. Congratulations. So this is a term that he coined about 15 or 20 years ago to describe, in a book called The Rise of the Creative Class, to describe people like us, young kind of creative professionals working in tech or other sort of creative white-collar industries that were interested in living in cities and were kind of breathing new life into urban culture. And he celebrated that. And he's a leading thinker in the kind of urban policy field. Lots of urban policymakers, elected officials, mayors really took that gospel and started creating policy around it, investing in urban cores and building the things that would attract people like us. He's out with this new book called The New Urban Crisis, which the basic thesis is, remember that thing I said a couple decades ago about how this was such a great phenomenon? Well, there were some things I didn't take into account. And it's a little bit of a reflection on what he's learned over the last couple of decades and the blind spots that he had. including the fact that there were already communities that were living in these places and they had been underinvested in for decades, and as a result did not have the economic resiliency to ride out the affordability shocks that would come with this increased investment. So liquid asset, this is a stat for Oakland. This is sort of true. This is sort of an indicator of economic resiliency. It's true in urban centers across the country. It's a measure of how long you can live above the poverty line if you experience an income shock or an affordability shock, so a loss of a job or a huge increase in your rent. Clearly, the neighborhoods that would be experiencing this investment, many of the communities that were already there did not have the resiliency to kind of stick around as the property values increased, rents increased, and the price of goods around them increased. So, like I said, that's true across the country, really. What's pretty unique in the Bay Area is the housing crisis. So this is, it's a little bit of a detailed graph here, but basically you can tell up and to the right in a bad way when it comes to how the cost of living or cost of housing has increased in the Bay Area over the last few years. I could show you graphs all day, lest anyone tell you that all we need to do to get out of this crisis is build market rate housing. This graph will show you, it's a little bit wonky, but the regional housing need allocation is basically a number that is assigned to every locality in the Bay Area, actually in the state of California, that says this is how many units of housing you have to build in order to keep up with population growth. And as you can see, we're currently pretty close to meeting the goals for above moderate income. It's about 120% of the area median income. And woefully behind in every other income category. So for people who are, living in my neighborhood in downtown Oakland and looking at 2,500 tech workers coming into their neighborhood, it's pretty clear to them that the investment that's going to come is not going to be created for them. And we see this in the jobs picture as well. So we are seeing a real increase in high-income jobs and low-income jobs, and a kind of hollowing out of the middle class and good middle-wage jobs. So you can see there 11% job growth. This is in the Bay Area. 11% job growth in middle-wage jobs, 22% at high-end, and 17% in low-wage. And then the actual amount of money that people are making in those jobs is lower. It's growing slower in the middle-wage jobs. And basically what this ends up doing is hollowing out the middle class. So you see that top set of bars is the growth in the middle class has been dropping over the last few decades. Lower and higher income households have been rising, which obviously is creating more inequality in the region. And literally we're seeing, again, kind of we'll share all these charts. I'm kind of a chart nerd, but a literal one-to-one replacement of lower income households with higher income households. So this shows that in 2015, 2016, Silicon Valley, which they're counting as sort of San Francisco and, San Francisco and San Mateo, Santa Clara counties, an increased gain of 19,000 households at that upper end and a loss of 19,500 in the lower end. So it's a literal one-to-one replacement of upper income households with middle and lower income households. So that's essentially displacement. And so now it becomes more rational to think about how my neighbors were seeing Uber coming to town as something that was really going to push them out. And then that's the first issue, is this sort of global trend of reurbanization in cities and investment in communities that can't necessarily all ride out the affordability shocks that come with them. The uniqueness of the housing crisis in the Bay Area that is hollowing out the middle class and increasing inequality because of those housing prices. That's the second reason. And then the third reason I think that we see this dynamic in particular, and people blaming the tech industry for this problem, is that tech doesn't show up to kind of contribute to the solution set to these problems. And when, my neighbors see people like us getting on private buses and heading off to exclusive campuses where everything is provided for them and not engaging in the community, it's really easy for them to think that we don't care. and that we've got ours, and we don't really care what our impact on the community is. And I know, because I've been organizing tech workers for just longer than just about anybody. There's a small cadre of us. That there is a ton of energy in the tech community to do more, and they just don't know how to get involved. We've done a lot of research around what motivates people who work in tech to be civically engaged, and by far the number one emotion that we hear that people are feeling is shame and guilt. And so we don't think it has to be that way. We know that there are ways that tech can use its disproportionate civic power to help change these dynamics. And so that's what we're doing. And this is our mission. So I'm sort of old school internet. I still believe that the internet is the most democratizing communications platform in human history, and that the industry that's growing up on top of that platform has a unique responsibility to help lower barriers to entry, not just to democracy and cultural production, but to the economy as well. And I think we can do that, but it's only going to happen if the people who are building the companies that sit on top of that platform show up to make it so. And so we, TechEquity Collaborative, are the channel for folks who work in tech to do that. And we do it in a few ways. The first is sort of awareness raising and educational stuff. So we do events on topics mostly in housing now, but also getting into workforce and labor issues. And we have a book club. So we're doing things to help you kind of understand what the root causes of the issues are, what the policy solution set might be, and how you can plug in and get involved. We have volunteer opportunities that are sort of non-political. So we do things like nonprofit board training, train our community on what it is to serve on a nonprofit board, and then match them with organizations who are looking for board members. We have a giving circle, sort of pooled philanthropy. And then, of course, we do policy advocacy work. And again, the areas we focused on right now, we're mostly focused on housing, but getting into workforce and labor issues as well. So I want to talk about some of that policy advocacy work. And I know, as Colin mentioned, you guys are, as everyone in the region is, really thinking about housing. Housing is front of mind. So just to dig in a little bit on that issue in particular, for those of you who follow state level politics, last year the state legislature passed 15 bills in a housing package to address the housing crisis. And this is really the first time in a generation that the state has done anything significant to address housing. And so it's a really great sign that finally there's some political will to start tackling this problem. So it's great news. However, what the kind of the package that was passed is not coming close at all to meeting the need that we have to actually fix the housing crisis. So you see this red bar, we need $15 billion in capital annually to actually make up the gap in what we need and what we haven't been building in housing. The bills that were passed would add about $4 billion. And actually, the biggest one of those is a ballot initiative that you will all have the chance to vote on in November. So it's not actually guaranteed funding until that ballot initiative passes. But what we were spending was less than $1 billion. So as you can see, some progress, but a lot more to do. Not just in making that middle bar meet the red bar, but in having the red bar come down a lot. So how do we actually reduce the cost of building, but also find new sources of capital to build affordable housing? This is the gap we need to make up. So this is what we haven't been building for the last 10 or 15 years. We need to be building as a state 180,000 new units of housing per year to keep up with population growth. That does not even account for obviously the deficit. And some would say that 180,000 number is very conservative. The new legislation would only add about 14,000 units of new housing per year. So still a lot of work to do. And that's where, we need to really be rolling up our sleeves and bringing the tech community to the table to help advance those policy solutions. So we have crafted a policy platform around housing, which is, there's some copies floating around the room too, if you want to read it in more detail. But essentially, what it says is that we need to figure out, I think many times in the housing debate, for those of you who follow it, what's frustrating about it is it seems like there are these two factions. One is the sort of developer YIMBY faction, which says we just need to streamline development, make it a lot easier to build. And then there's a faction that in some minds is trying to hold that process hostage because they don't feel like tenants are being protected. There isn't enough attention being paid to communities that are being displaced, right? We think that's really a false choice, and that the two groups that are kind of at odds in that dynamic have a lot of common ground, a lot of shared interest, especially to fight against a common enemy, which is the NIMBY groups, the sort of landed gentry homeowners of the Bay Area who are not interested in building housing for a variety of reasons. They, kind of want to shut the door on California and say we're full. And so we, I think, as the people who kind of suffer in that dynamic, have a responsibility to come together with the folks who are working on behalf of the lower income Californians to create a policy agenda that can do both at the same time. And I really think that's possible. So these are our three kind of priorities for any housing agenda. We do need to build more. We need to build more at all levels. We can't just focus on market rate development. We have to figure out how to find more funding streams for affordable housing that the market is not going to solve for. We also need to protect vulnerable communities. Even if we were building all of the housing that we needed, it's not going to come online for several years. And in the meantime, communities are being displaced now. Oakland has lost 50% of its African American population since 2000. So we need to make sure that there are strong renter protections in place in the meantime, so that people can stay in their homes as that new housing comes online. And we need to recognize, and this is something that really gets overlooked in the conversations, that the housing system we live in now, the reason our neighborhoods are segregated, the reason that some communities hold more wealth than others, is because of explicit policy decisions that have been made over the last century or so in housing. And if we're going to get to a place where we have affordability for everybody and integrated communities where everybody has the same opportunities, we're going to have to be as intentional in our policy decisions as folks were when they wanted to segregate neighborhoods. So that's our housing agenda. Obviously, we need all of your help to make this happen. We're working currently on several advocacy efforts that sort of advance this agenda, which I'm happy to talk about more. But we need you. So you can join now. Becca has, if you feel like the old pen and paper version, you can sign up here, or you can just go to the website or on your phone and join and help us do this work.
All right, well, thanks so much, you guys. I want to give a warm appreciation for Catherine.
Thank you, guys.